How long is a piece of string? If a tree falls in a forest and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound? If Jesus could walk on water, could he swim on land? And how was Tadhg Beirne technically onside while seemingly occupying a different air coat to Rory Scannell for that crossfield kick on Saturday? You're very welcome to the 42 Rugby Weekly. Gavan Casey here, and joining us to answer at least one of life's great conundrums are Murray Kinsella of the 42. Murray, how are you?
I'm good, Gav.
Good. And Bernard Jackman, how are you, sir?
Excellent, thank you.
We're going to run through all of the provincial action from last weekend, look ahead to the weekend coming. Naturally enough, talk about the Irish men's squad, talk about the IRFU's review into the changing ground debacle at Donnybrook, which came out yesterday. We record on a Thursday. Probably a few more things as well. We might chat about England's squad, some big calls by Eddie Jones. But I suppose, Murray, the big news of the week was dropped into our inboxes on Slack by our colleague Carlo Shaughnessy during the week when it was established that we are the 15th ranked sports podcast in El Salvador. We couldn't get to the bottom of it, so it's time to ask Bernard Jackman, are there a clan of Jackmans down Soyapango way that we don't know about?
Not that I know, but if they're well off, I might be making contact for the old Will. That's good to hear. We're branching out.
Yeah, Bahrain as well, Cayman Islands. We're growing the game. Now, this is what we set out to do. It's quite a beautiful thing.
The Roadshow series is going to launch hopefully in a few months' time. We're going to all these destinations that Cara flagged. Yeah, Cayman Islands, South Africa was up there as well. So we're going to have a nice little tour at some stage.
100%. Murray, kick us off there with the review from the IRFU into the training ground situation. People will be familiar with the story. Obviously, Connacht being forced to sort of get, changed for their Interpro game with Leinster, seemingly in the bowels of hell. Obviously, there was a lot of discourse and discord afterwards. Apologies were issued. And then yesterday, as I say, the IRFU published the findings of their investigation. And I suppose just to give people a few bullet points here. Oh no, shit, I've lost it. Sorry, I had it open. Do you want to talk us through it, actually, Murray, if that's all right?
Yeah, I mean, kind of key issues identified were the headline one here is really an ambiguity as to the responsibility for the organisation of the final weekend of the fixtures for the series, which is an incredible thing to identify, really, that no one really knew who was in charge of organising the last weekend of an Interpro series. It's absolutely baffling that was the case. And that caused obvious confusion around the operational and logistical elements, as the RFU review puts it, for event planning. And they've kind of come up with a few recommendations, basically publishing a set of guidelines that ensure a minimum standard for this kind of stuff going forward, extra training and support for the staff and facility management people who will be there on the days, and then a liaison officer for each of the provincial squads to kind of filter through so that they can flag issues as they come up, which all is really common sense. But I mean, Philip Brown came out and said the RFU, everyone was appalled by the conditions, and again resolved that this is not going to happen. But it's just crazy that there was ambiguity over who was organising the final fixtures of an Interpro series. That would not happen in men's rugby, and it's just flagging that this has not been good enough for any rugby, really, women's rugby, men's rugby. It's just crazy that was the situation. And listen, there's the resolve there that's not going to happen again. Yeah, we got to see the proof being in the pudding going forward. This was always going to be what we expected from the review, but what happens again, actions are going to speak a lot louder than these words.
Yeah, strategically released about 2 hours before the men's squad was named yesterday. Decent PR job there. On the one hand, Bernard, the mea culpa, I'm sure, will be partly appreciated, and it was necessary. On the other hand, reading through some of the bullet points that Murray listed off there that I couldn't find a moment ago, it's actually just astonishing that this happened. And I don't know, maybe they feel as though by pointing these things out, it's like, look, we acknowledge there was wrongdoing and so on, or complete neglect, really. But I actually don't even think this helps the IRFU in a sense, because it's so bad that it's kind of staggering to even imagine how it happened in the first place.
Yeah, it also took a long time to to work out like what happened. I mean, surely in 24 hours you could work that out. So it'd be like me letting my dog off the lead on the beach, chases another dog. I say I'm going to do a review of it, and 4 weeks later I come back and say I should have it on the lead. Like, that's how obvious it is. And no, but like, seriously, like you there's only 3 or 4 people involved in running that, so you get them into a room, and you know, to take 5 or 6, whatever it is, 4 or 5 weeks to come up with that, which is pretty obvious. It's not. Look at it. I think it's poor they released it just before the men's. Even if there was any doubt around, you know, the importance of it, and you don't want to be seen to cover it up, don't release it around that time. You waited for 4.5 weeks or whatever you waited for. Just wait until there's a little gap, so it doesn't look like it's been buried. It's great that they have put their hands up. It's great they're putting measures in place, but you know, I don't see how it took that long to work it out, to be honest. I mean, there's a couple of people involved in it. You know, it's just, they say speed kills, but I mean, this is just acting slowly for the sake of it, to look like you're actually going through a massive review. And you know, the reality is, I can't see how it could take longer than 24 hours to figure out what happened, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm sure it didn't really. There are potentially positive updates, Murray, on the women's side of things as well, or more palpable change afoot in the news that Rory O'Connor reported last night that Greg McWilliams is set to replace what's his name?
Adam Griggs.
Fucking hell, I don't know how I forgot that. That Greg McWilliams is set to replace Adam Griggs at the end of the November International. So Griggs will remain in charge for 2 more games, and then Greg McWilliams takes the reins, I think, for 4 years. Rory was reporting in the Irish Independent that he'll have a broader remit over the women's game, aligning the sevens programme with the 15s in a sense, and working day by day as well, I think, with the sevens is what Rory was saying. And we know from Greg McWilliams' past that he has obviously strong links to the women's game. He was assistant coach in that 2013 Grand Slam campaign, involved in the 2014 World Cup, and then has since worked in the US. Came back to Dublin recently as a high performance consultant for World Rugby. What do you make of that appointment, which I should stress hasn't been confirmed yet, I don't think, but looks like it's very much on the cards?
Yeah, it certainly does. And if it's confirmed, I think it'll be a really popular and positive appointment. As you say, there's a great history there within women's rugby in Ireland with Greg McWilliams, and was highly regarded and highly rated by that playing group. He worked alongside Philip Goose Doyle to really drive that team forward, and his work behind the scenes with skills and their attack and things like that were really well received, as well as being very good kind of with the personal side and the relationship side of the thing, which is massive in coaching. And obviously has gone away and got very different experiences in the US with the Eagles most recently, worked in Yale in the college game over there, and with Rugby United New York as well. So it is always good to see people integrated back into the system as well. And yeah, that understanding of the landscape and having worked there is important as well. I think a long-term project is a good thing as well, because as we've discussed quite a bit recently, this needs to start from the ground right up, and there's a lot of work that needs to go into ensuring that the next World Cup cycle is going to be a successful one that includes Ireland getting to the World Cup. So yeah, if that was confirmed, I think it'd be a positive appointment, and hopefully there's a bit of resource around a coaching team around Greg McWilliams and a chance to get some quality assistance in there, because there's a lot of work even away from the national camps that needs to be done. Again, something that's been flagged recently, getting out to the provinces, having that interaction with players, being at AIL matches, and all that side of it is massive. We should just mention the IRFU release yesterday gave us an update on those 2 reports that are also going on. The failure to qualify for the World Cup review, which is going to take 8 to 9 weeks, they say. And then the broader, wider review basically into the whole game and the structure of it, which is going to be early 2022, they say, for an update on that one. Again, like, those are big parts of the picture as well. And you would hope that all of this is a turning point for women's rugby.
Yeah, it does seem as though the report into the failure to qualify for the World Cup will be published as well. I think they told RTE yesterday. So we'll wait and see. I'm sure it'll make for some interesting reading. On McWilliams, Bernard, yes from you?
Yeah, I know him well, so I'm biased. I think he's a good appointment, particularly because of his experience in the women's game. And he's gone to the States. He's upskilled. He's very good with people. I understand his remit will be to try and influence change in the domestic game. And I think he's motivated and energetic. He wants the job. He appreciates what an opportunity it is. And yeah, I think he'll be good. I think he'll be very good, to be honest. Look, unfortunately for him, he's starting at a very low ebb, so it's going to take a while to make change. I wouldn't like to see him spend too much time with the sevens, because I think, that's shown that project hasn't been the success that we were told it would be. So I'd like him to spend more time with the 15s game, but obviously keep an eye on the players from sevens who have the capability to transfer, but not get fixated by that. But look, he knows what he needs to do. So as I said, he's come for the 15s women's game. That was one of his earliest coaching experiences, and was part of a successful team. And I think he's smart enough to actually bring back in, some of those players, as part of his, not if he's not coaching staff, but as part of his ambassadors or drivers or influencers, because they had been long neglected and pushed aside. So I think that's something that I would imagine he's smart enough to do that, and just get some goodwill behind the team, which will be the starting point anyway.
Yeah, that could go a long way. On the men's side of things, then, Murray, the squad was named yesterday for the men's November internationals. So Dan Sheehan and Kieran Frawley, the two uncapped players, Thomas Ahern and Jamie Osborne, brought in as sort of development players, which was nice to see. What were your impressions of the squad overall? I mean, there's no need to list it out. I'm sure people have seen it at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big squad, 38 man, so you've got plenty of wiggle room there, and still there are players who will be feeling very unlucky not to be involved, and people riled up by certain players being omitted, but you've kind of got everyone in there, and you've got a nice balance, as you say, of those younger guys in. Only two uncapped players, but it's worth remembering that 6 of the squad got their first caps in July, and there's others like Casey and Baird and even James Lowe who are very new to international rugby, so there is quite a freshness to it all, as well as the returning Simon Zebo, which obviously caught the eye. He wasn't in that 50-man squad in September. He's had 2 appearances for Munster since, and clearly done enough to convince Farrell to get him back in there. That'll be a fascinating new, I suppose, or refreshed element to the squad. He obviously wants to play at fullback. He offers something different probably to the deserved incumbent and first choice Hugo Keenan, with his, I suppose, creative touches. And he has great international experience as well. Like 35 caps is not to be kind of sniffed at. That experience can count, and he does look, of all accounts, he's energetic and excited to get the opportunity and kind of relaunch his career at the highest level. I think the two uncapped players are worth just focusing on a little bit, because they're such exciting players. They're both 23, so they haven't burst in as teenagers, but what we've seen most recently has been really exciting from them. Sheehan is an explosive athlete with a really good skill set. He's a really big unit, and that counts obviously in test rugby. And I think there's real nice skills there, even around his line-out throwing, which will obviously become more consistent, but it looks to have real nice variety. Birch will probably tell us more on that, but I honestly think he can really compete with Keller even over the next 10 years. They're the same age, and they'll be vying in Leinster and in Ireland. And then Frawley, who has settled in the 12 shirt, offers something probably a little bit different to the other centres, with his background as a 10, as a 15, as a kind of playmaker. His distribution is really nice. Even last weekend you saw it. Leinster's plays off lineouts are so much more threatening with his triple threat, really. He can pass, kick, run, and he's a big guy as well. He can tackle, he can carry. So I'm excited by those two coming into the mix. The development players you mentioned as well, that's always positive to see. I thought Nathan Doak might be in there as well, to be honest, and I think there would have been value in it, but Ahern and Osborne are really uniquely athletic. They definitely have the potential to be presences at the highest level in years to come. So I think it's a exciting squad overall. Of course, you can look at bits and pieces where maybe guys were unlucky, but there's lots to like about it.
Yeah, there is. With the Zebo thing, Bernard, it is interesting, obviously, in that he wasn't part of that 50-man list. And listen, we know what he can do, and Andy Farrell certainly knows what he can do. And yet, I don't know if he's had much of an opportunity to show what he can do for Munster so far this season. I know that might sound like nonsense when you consider he scored 2 tries on his return. And to be honest, every time he's had the ball, he's shown flashes of that sort of Zebo brilliance, that little sprinkling of magic, but he's barely had the ball is the point I'm trying to make. So were you surprised by his inclusion?
I was surprised because I agree with you. He hasn't been given, bar round one where he got some decent touches. Obviously, he didn't play in Scarlets and he got starved to possession against Connacht. So yeah, it's not like he's been like outstandingly good, but in fairness to him, a lot of that's down to how he's being used. I'm delighted to see him back in. I think it's a really good sign that there's nothing personal, there's not an agenda there, that he's going to get a crack. And him and James Lowe obviously as left wingers. Zebo obviously has that flexibility that he could potentially cover at fullback and or play at fullback. I mean, I'd love to see him if Munster can't get the ball to him on the left wing, I'd love to see him looking at him as a potential fullback option. And I think it goes back to that Connacht game, and I know Joey got a bit of slack for the block down, but for Carty's try. But I think it's Munster still trying to figure out how to use Zebo properly, and particularly for his kicking game. And when I was over in Racing a couple of weeks ago, I had a good chat with Prendy about Zebo and his obviously ability, and and Prendy was raving about how good his kicking game actually is, and it's underused at the moment. And like Jake White, a lot of people say, your first position you pick in a team is your tight head. Jake White insists your first position is your left footer. And if you have a second left footer, you get him in as well. So it's just something to think about. I know Ireland have used James Lowe's left foot a lot on exits, and obviously he's got a long kick. But I think Zebo is probably more accurate, to be honest. So yeah, maybe that's going to be, his strength or area, that point of difference that's going to get him back into the team. And then if he gets into the team, we know what he can do ball in hand. But I think it's a really positive move by Farrell as well. I kind of understand now why he didn't put him into 50. He's obviously felt he's just coming back. Let him get back, let him play, show he's in form, and then if he's good enough, we'll reward him. So I feel I was disappointed he wasn't in the 50, but I'm happier now that he's shown little glimpses, and Farrell has shown that he's open to using him.
What about your thoughts on the squad overall, Birch? What else caught your eye?
I'm delighted for Dan Sheehan. Obviously, he's carried on this season, even though Kelleher looks to be operating at a higher level as well. The interesting one is Herring. So I've been up at 3 of Ulster's games so far. So I've been watching the warm-ups and obviously watching the games. But I've actually never seen as good a thrower as Rob Herring. And like that's over 25 years. It's actually a thing of beauty, and I never studied it before. Obviously, you watch it in game, he can throw well, but his throw is phenomenally good. He's a left-hander, and he just has a completely different technique or style than anyone I've ever seen, and I think that's interesting. So last year I would have been maybe, pushing for Kelleher to start ahead of him, and I'm not saying I'm not still pushing for Kelleher to start ahead of him, but I think if Ireland want to go to a set-piece game, and his play around the pitch is decent. Probably not. He's not as explosive as 2 lads, but his throw is phenomenally good, and I can see why Paul would be batting for him. If you're being judged on your line out, or you're going after a team by kicking the touch a lot or looking to get line out opportunities, he is that good. So you've got a lovely balance there. You've got him, who's really solid, and then you have obviously the 2 lads who just look like real dynamic ball carriers with a better age profile than Rob. So yeah, that's the area that obviously my old position, but I'm very excited about.
Got a couple of emails in advance of the squad announcement, Murray. Or sorry, you got an email, and there was a long question as well in the members WhatsApp group. So to read that out to begin with, this was from Tim. Question for the pod: with the Irish squad out soon, just wondering how hard is it to get back in favour once a coach has made his mind up that your face doesn't fit? Some players always seem to be ignored regardless of how well they play. Over the years, we've seen loads of players ignored or maybe called up but never play a minute, regardless of being the form player in that position. Players like McCloskey, Gilroy, Cooney, Sean Cronin, Ruddock, Jack O'Donoghue, Tiernan O'Halloran, Carty, plenty more too. all given a token selection in a squad, but rarely used and dropped once any other option comes along. Yet we seem to love calling up the next big thing straight from the Leinster Academy with 5 minutes of first team experience. I think you could say the same there for maybe somebody like Craig Casey or something similar. But he adds, maybe a reason we have struggled for years to gain any proper depth in key positions like 2, 9, 10, 15. It was always just pick the same players all the time. And then this email from Ken Murray that you received, Murray, he said, with France announcing their squad today, this is a few days back naturally, of 9 new caps, and the most capped player being a 27-year-old Gael Fickou with 63 caps, and the oldest player being a 32-year-old Bernard Leroux. Is it a sign of extreme conservatism in Ireland that we still are relying on the usual suspects in every international window, and that this knocks us back in every Rugby World Cup without fail? If not now, then when will we push the younger players to play in big games rather than a few minute cameos against Italy, for example, in the Six Nations? We are extremely good at keeping our talent in Ireland, so why are the players who are performing well for the provinces not being rewarded with international caps and experience in the big games over their more experienced, quote unquote, counterparts? So similar sorts of questions, and still valid in the sense that, like, okay, the squad has been named, but no 15 or 23 has been named yet. We haven't seen a minute played. So Murray, how do you respond?
Yeah, very interesting points made there. As we've kind of referenced, there is quite a freshness to this squad. There's quite a bit of inexperience around it in terms of international caps, but that is the key now, because, you know, Andy Farrell's probably run out of opportunities to actually trial things and see if players are up to the pressure of Test rugby before World Cup in 2023. Like, it's always really interesting to see Eddie Jones. I know they're only press releases, but his quotes will always reference that we're building towards 2023, whereas Ireland kind of avoid that kind of talk at all costs, really. But I do think it is important that we see it in matchday 23s now. You know, Gavin Coombs continuing to build international experience, maybe get Dan Sheehan a cap to see what he's like in that kind of pressure. Andrew Porter's obviously a new loose head option now. He's obviously come in with that experience more recently in Leinster, and getting him minutes in that position is really important, I think, going forward. In terms of the first question with those guys who are just beneath or just outside the mix, that's always going to be the reality of it, isn't it? Like, there's always going to be players who are just behind the most talented players of their generation, and then you've got those younger guys like Ahern and Osborne and, say, Coombs, another one, where, you know, you've got to expose them. Maybe some of the players in that middle part are actually more advanced or playing better rugby, but you've got to get your squad developed from the bottom up too. So there's always going to be, as I said, players who are really unlucky, and I agree on some of those names. Jack Carty obviously had a great day last weekend. Jack O'Donoghue's playing brilliant rugby, and there probably is an element of it that the coaches in place decide that this isn't our guy for this position. Like, the 10 one is really interesting. This is probably the 3 out halves that Farrell wanted to select all along as his crop of 10s. Johnny Sexton, his key guy, his captain, his first choice. Joey Carberry is 25. They obviously would have hoped that he hadn't had injuries like he's had and would have been a bit further on in his development, but they clearly have faith and belief that he can drive on and become a starting 10 for Ireland. And then Harry Byrne, who isn't playing or hasn't played as well as maybe Jack Carty, for example, but Farrell clearly believes that his potential is greater than Carty's, probably, without, you know, putting those kind of words into Farrell's mouth, but that's what I'm kind of deducing from it. He believes there's real potential there. Obviously there's been injury frustration, but he's a fan of what he can do, and he sees that high ceiling in his game. So that's probably an example of where their thinking is around this. There's obviously elements of form, there's elements of experience, and then there's elements of potential in players, and you've got to find a balance with that. But I do think it's important that we see that reflected in matchday squads as well.
What are your own thoughts on it, Bernard, a supposed conservatism in blooding young players? Because one of the issues, and we have touched upon it before, is that for Ireland, there's almost less opportunity to do that, in the sense that the Six Nations has to be taken, I was going to say taken seriously. It's always going to be taken seriously, but it actually matters financially. I mean, standings actually matter financially. So particularly with the situation in which Andy Farrell finds himself now, where yes, like you're coming off the back of some decent form, and particularly that win against England in the last Six Nations, he is still somewhat unproven in the role. He still has work to do to probably stave off some of the doubters, the haters of the world. So yes, November will be a chance to play some of these players, but when push comes to shove again in the spring, he's not going to experiment. The Italy game is always cited as, why not play practically an academy team or a full development team? You should win anyway. But last time around, he needed a victory. He played pretty much a full team, and that's going to be the reality if you need a result against Italy, more than likely. So I don't know, is it just a lack of opportunity to actually give lads a chance compared to countries like England, where they are a little bit more concrete and perhaps can afford to not sacrifice the Six Nations, but use it in a developmental sense?
Yeah, I think, well, if we're comparing it with England and France, so Eddie's his own man. Obviously, he's been incredibly successful. He's coming off a poor season for England, and obviously the review process that led to, and the recommendations from it. So he's still very focused on winning a World Cup, and that was his goal going into 2 years out from Japan. Was we're going to do everything in our power to win a World Cup, and obviously they fell short at the final, but they were managing to rack up trophies and silverware on the way. It's interesting. So a lot of people talking about how Eddie's blood and youngsters, etc. I saw a stat there that 40% of the people he calls into camp don't get capped. So he's like, it's one thing bringing him into camp. The other thing is obviously giving them test experience. So I wouldn't, Jamie George obviously got back in due to the injury to Cowan Dickey. I watched Saracens smash Bath last weekend. Vili Bunapola is back in form. I mean, I certainly wouldn't write off George Ford is flying for Leicester, and I know Marcus Smith is the bee's knees at the moment, but I wouldn't say that George Ford, Billy Vunipola, Jamie George won't feature for England in the Six Nations or at a World Cup. But probably with the player pool, Eddie can afford to leave them out. He knows what he has with those lads, and he can make change. And likewise, France, Fabien Galtier has been given a mandate to win the World Cup in France in 2023. So it's probably a little bit different. And obviously they've picked a very young squad again. It's probably a little bit different mandate than Andy Farrell has, where obviously, because of our lack of success at World Cups, it's nearly dangerous to put too much pressure or focus on it, because we can't seem to get it right. So he's probably more focused on the there and now. I think Harry Byrne, Kieran Frawley and Dan Sheehan are effectively in this squad in a higher bracket than Tom Ahern and Osborne, but they're really development players. They're players that obviously can do a job now, but Farrell believes in the near future they can play a role. So that's probably why Jack Carty isn't in. I think he's obviously happy with Sexton, obviously who's flying. Joey, obviously there's lots of question marks around, but we all believe he has the ability to be an important player for Ireland and potentially the successor to Johnny. So I can see why this squad has come the way it has, but I don't think it's too stale, to be honest. I think it's pretty much par for the course for Farrell as he's been plotting this rejuvenation of his Irish team, and I wouldn't have any massive issues with it. And especially, as I said, I think England and France are setting up differently and chasing different things.
It's actually nice in a way to just be planning ahead for, say, a Six Nations, Murray, rather than everything being centred on a World Cup. I don't know, it feels sort of freeing or something, and maybe this is the way that we should do it. Like, maybe other countries can plan for it. I mean, as Bert outlined there, England were gunning for the last World Cup from 2 years out and still didn't win it. Probably fell short of their own expectations in that final, albeit with a caveat that their front row was pretty much decimated. Maybe for us, for Ireland, it's just like, let's just take it a year at a time and see what happens when we get to France.
Yeah, maybe we should commit on this podcast to heaping absolutely no pressure on, just to make sure that there's no over focus on it. And maybe that is a better policy. South Africa did a good job of having a short lead in without a big long project towards it and winning the thing. So maybe that's the blueprint now. Eddie Jones one is really interesting because, like, obviously you look at their squad and you go, wow, that's so exciting. Look at all the kind of fresh faces he has in there. But then you look at last season's fresh faces that he had in there and they're gone now. Like Ben Earl, who I think is an excellent player, and Birch mentioned Sarri's there. Anytime see him play, he's brilliant. I thought he did really well for England. Now he's just gone out of the mix. So he's missing on his development. And some of the players that Jones calls up at times, you're thinking, and like obviously watch a lot of rugby, but you're kind of thinking, like, has he really earned his shot in there? Like there's some of the young guys who are just emerging, and obviously you want to keep your eyes open for that potential at the top level, but sometimes his decision making and his selection is just a little bit wild for me. And absolutely I agree. I think like George Ford and Billy Vunipola are brilliant players, and Mako Vunipola, and to discard them would be lunacy really. But them being out of the mix now means they miss a couple of international games with England. They miss a chance to build a cohesion we always hear coaches talking about as being so important. So that's a bit more of a kind of scattergun approach to things, and it's very hard to really see the long-term sense, I suppose, in what Eddie Jones does at times. Obviously he's got a great history of success, and I wouldn't doubt him in that regard, but the England squad is a bit baffling in some sections.
Certainly is. We'll talk about the provinces. Before we do that, just want to tell you that the 42's new book, Behind the Lines Volume 5, is on shelves, almost on shelves, but certainly available on our Shopify, which is our online shop, www.the42.shop. And it has a collection of our best stories from the last 12 months. It costs €12. We've absolutely loved putting it together. We always do. I think it's one of our favourite times of the year, Murray, because finally we can convince our parents that as online only journalists we have something vaguely resembling a real job when they can hold some of the work in their hands. But really appreciate all of the support of the 42 members, obviously, whose support makes the book possible, and they get a 20% discount as well on the online shop. So head to www.the42.shop for Behind the Lines Volume 5. Murray, your most recent offering to the 42 members was a newsletter sent yesterday outlining why, strictly speaking, Tadhg Beirne was onside. Or at least that seems to be the perception.
No, it wasn't. Sorry, it wasn't intended to outline that at all. It was intended to outline what's been going on. What's been going on behind the scenes, because obviously this has been widely discussed publicly by us, by supporters, and also behind the scenes where, incredibly, it seems there's no actual consensus. Like, this just sums up rugby so well. There's a really high profile incident and there's actually no agreement on whether this player is onside or offside. It's absolutely crazy that a sport, I mean, what a silly sport. I know this is a rugby podcast, but basically it's gone to World Rugby for clarification. There's been a request put in by the URC to clarify, like, is Tadhg Beirne onside or offside here? And we discussed it on Monday, and the more you look at it, the more marginal it is, and the more you convince yourself either way. My feeling is that he's still offside, because it just feels like offside to me. But now that I've been presented with a different viewpoint that he's potentially onside because his right foot is in line with the kick and his left foot's up off the ground, I'm kind of doubting myself. So basically there's no answer, I don't think, or definitive answer yet on this. And even at World Rugby level, it seems there's split opinion on it, Gav.
Bert, what are your thoughts?
It's one of the oldest techniques in the book: divide and conquer, create doubt. And that's what's happening. I mean, I from my point of view, it's offside, and I won't unless they you have to trust your instinct, and you have to trust what you've seen all your life in terms of how it's refereed. And if you're going to make a change like that, and you're going to make an interpretation like that, this needs to be flagged like it is for any new law interpretation, so people can get their head around it. So maybe I'm old school. Certainly I've shared this clip with all my different coaching groups around the world, and we haven't had one coach come back and say, "Oh, that's marginal." It's to the naked eye, and I've zoomed in on it. I have software that can zoom in at the foot. I never knew about this foot being in front, and I think if they go down this route, it's going to make the game so much harder to referee, because as hard as it is to referee the body being level or behind, it's going to be a hell of a lot harder to referee was the front foot on the ground or not. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, if you freeze frame it from the TV footage, you can hardly make it out. I've zoomed in, as I said, and it's still marginal. So it's the first time I've ever heard this interpretation of it around the front foot. I was always led to believe that it was the body being level or behind. And I just hope that they're not just if there's a genuine error made, I think just accept it and move on. I actually think if this is going to be how it's refereed, it's going to cause chaos. And you can imagine as players, like, we want to have stuff that's simple, and I don't see how judging the front foot that you can be in front of the kicker as long as your back foot is behind or level. I don't see how that makes it simpler, to be honest. And maybe I'm too simple, but I think the game is already hard to referee, and to double down on a technicality on this, the repercussions are going to make the game harder to referee, long term. So that's just my feeling on it. As I said, I haven't heard of any new interpretation going into this game. When I saw it, I was commentating on it. I straight away said, "Oh, that's going to be called back for Tadhg Beirne being offside." If they had went to the TMO and the TMO had discussed it live and went frame by frame and explained the logic behind the decision, I could actually handle that, to be honest, to a certain extent, and it would have been educational for me. And I don't portray to know every law or to be an expert in every area of it, but at least then I would have went, okay, I can understand where the referee and the officials are coming from, and whether I agree or disagree, at least I can see the process to make that decision without going to the TMO and going through it forensically when there's a try involved. And I know, look, there's been loads of debate and people sending me direct messages and things and saying, oh, it evens out over the course of the game. There was a knock-on missed, there was an offside at the ruck, or there was the tackler didn't release. Yeah, of course, I accept that. As a former coach, we analyse our own games with forensic detail, and we're used to the mistakes. Some people said, oh, if Ultan Land doesn't drop the kickoff. We know that. Ultan Land on Monday had to look at that and understand that he had a mistake which led to them not being able to close out the game. That's a given. So it's not just jumping on referees, but it's everybody involved in it be able to go, right, what can we do better here? And I just think to make that call, as I said, that it's not an offside with 3 viewings of it, with no zoom, and not be able to explain why, I think that's an error in itself, to be honest. And if you're Andy Friend, you just think, and people say, oh, maybe Andy Friend, his perception is he's being hard done by. But if you're Andy Friend and you see that not being really examined, what do you think? Do you know what I mean? What do you think it's fair? And would it happen in sports ground? I don't know. And also, I'll be honest, Munster and Leinster fans, they don't understand how much rub of the green they get from referees. And I've certainly shared clips. I won't say Munster and Leinster. I've shared clips with teams at the top of the table, and the coaches were astounded by how it is on the other side as a bottom feeder or such. You know what I mean? And that's the issue that the URC have to do. And there's a narrative as well. Oh, look, it's all down to the fact we don't have a referee manager. That's bullshit. When Greg was there, Greg was brilliant, but his ability to influence each of the referee managers in the host unions, I would say, was difficult or was limited. So the URC, everyone's looking at it at the moment because obviously South Africans have come in and they've cried wool. They've basically called it out, and so it's been in the news. We've seen some really high profile errors. Okay, and I'm not saying the Munster error. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about in general. There's been some really high profile marginal decisions in other games that has got in the news. It's also on terrestrial TV, so more people are looking at it. And the Welsh and the Scots are laughing. I'm getting messages saying, now you know what it's like, what we've had to put up with Irish referees, because unfortunately for the last 18 months, we've had to have our own referees referee us, whereas before they were over in Wales or Scotland, and we've had the Welsh and the Scots come in here. So I think there's a culmination of facts that have led to this now, where it's become a crisis point, and it's not just the URC. The URC is the worst league in the world for refereeing. It's behind top 14 and Premiership for sure. But We saw with Razzie during the summer. It's at international level as well. There's a crisis, and Ireland, unfortunately, I'm doing a piece for the Sun Independent. We had four referees at the World Cup in 2003. We're a tier 1 country, and we had no referee at the World Cup in 2019. Andrew Brace was sent as a touch judge for his development. So we have fallen off the cliff in terms of our, and that's like people say, oh, that's me, and I'm making a judgment. Well, I don't pick the referees for a World Cup. You know what I mean? That's not my role. But I'd imagine the people who do pick the referees for the World Cup watch performances. I'd like to hope so. And someone else who's a referee or referee administrator decided the 2019 World Cup that our referees have fallen behind. That's just it's not fact. It's a fact that happened, but people can say, the Irish referees might say that it was bad selection. I don't know, but I think it is worrying signs, and we've talked about it before. But it's in the news again, and we're talking about refereeing rather than Jack Carty's performance or Gavin Coombs, etc.
So just to clarify, you're saying Byrne was onside, is it?
Oh,
no, I'm only messing.
Offside.
I'm messing.
Yeah, and I look, even if World Rugby come out and say he's onside, I still don't agree with it. I don't agree with it.
Yeah,
because that's not. Look, if that's how it's going to be refereed in the future, I will agree with it because that's how it is. But as I said, I've never, ever, ever seen or heard of it being refereed like that. So the example would be for box kicks now. You could effectively have Tadhg Beirne chasing a box kick from Craig Casey. He just makes sure his back foot is level with Craig Casey, and he could be halfway up the ruck as long as his right foot, his front foot is up in the air. That's how ludicrous it is, and it's going to be an absolute shit fight to referee offsides if that's the case. Everything's going to be going to TMO. Whereas I would like to say the touch judge, who should have seen it anyway, or the referee can see a body in front and just go, look, it's offside.
Yeah, no, totally. I think if it had been given as offside, nobody would have batted an eyelid. We would not be talking about it. And that means really he was spiritually offside, even if on some technical, physical level he wasn't. Yeah. But let's actually talk about the performance of Jack Carty, Connacht, and obviously Munster digging out a very important victory. We'll start with Munster there, Murray, in the sense that they won the game in the end and they actually did well to win it, even though Connacht absolutely should have closed the game out after Carty's try. Does it still impress you that Munster can do this? Are you expecting a little bit more from them as they do it? Because, and I don't want to go over old ground, but even allowing for the fact that the conditions were difficult, the ball was greasy, we do know that if Munster play a forward-oriented game, forward-dominated game, one-out runners, that kind of thing, and just try to ostensibly bash the way over the line when things get tough, it's not going to be enough against teams that are better than Connacht. We know that. And it almost wasn't enough against Connacht at the weekend. So it's one of those, again, where you're like, absolutely well done. You won the game, but is this going to go the same way that it has gone for the last 10 years plus?
Impossible to say right now. Obviously, it's a long way off till we get to those games, and I'm conscious of us not having the same chat about Munster every single week around this. Absolutely, conditions were tough. It was hard to move the ball. Honestly, the rain just stopped right before kickoff. Birch was there. It was absolutely pissing down beforehand, and it looked like it would be even worse, tougher. And there's literally loads of good elements in that. The bravery, I suppose, even to take that tap with 7 minutes to go rather than popping over the points. They trusted themselves to have that close in combative game to get over the line, and Barron took the try well, and the bench made a really good impact in terms of Wycherley, obviously with that restart, and Jack O'Donoghue yet again featuring prominently. And there was loads of little bits to like there. Once they got the line out issues sorted, which were really kind of eye-opening in the first half. It's rare enough that you see that scale of problems in the line-out from Munster, but once they got the maul motoring, that helped a fair degree as well. And yeah, it was a very familiar kind of looking Munster win in tough conditions and in a really tough game against a Connacht team who played really well and probably played well enough to win. As you say, they'll have massive regrets about how they managed the end game after Carty's try, and absolutely the performance was of the calibre of a winning team. It's disappointing, I suppose, that Simon Zebo touched the ball once in attack. I think he got two kick receipts, but he had one touch on the ball early on where he beats a defender and then pirouettes and powers into contact, and you think, wow, it'd be so exciting to see more of this happening. Largely the ability to go to width was in the kicking game, with Carberry kind of targeting that space out in the 15-metre channels on a number of occasions. That aside, it was hard to move the ball. At times they didn't have the momentum to allow their backline to come into the game. They didn't have that line out platform either to potentially play off and bring some of those exciting backs into the mix, and they were kind of living off scraps. And that's probably something that Joey Carberry is dealing with, the reality of it now. You know, he probably would have loved to have played in that Scarlets game where there was lovely clean possession and go forward momentum, and he would have been able to show the array of his skills. So there's definitely frustration that they haven't been able to show development. Even early on in the game, you saw little bits of interplay from the forwards, some nice footwork from Coombs before contact, and those things are really important, as well as flashy backline moves. But as is the reality of the game, when they come under pressure, they're going back to what they know is their strength. And yes, there's definitely an impressive element to that, but I agree with your lingering doubt, and we've flagged it, I think, every single week of this new season of the pod. That is going to be the lingering doubt all the way through until May, June kind of time, when the pressure is on in a massive knockout game.
Yeah, and as Murray says there, Bernard, there were times when I'm sure Munster would have liked to actually go to width, but particularly in the first half, Connacht were actually winning the breakdown battle, and Munster probably actually just didn't get an opportunity to do it. Carberry didn't get an opportunity to do it. He certainly did not get the armchair ride that Ben Healy had gotten a week prior. So that falls on Connacht then, as in it's a testament to how well they played, particularly in that first half. It's 2 games now at Thomond Park in the space of a few months where Connacht have either won or should have won. And I find that a bit of an indictment from Munster's point of view, brilliant from Connacht's point of view, because like if you were to list both squads and combine a 15 or combine a 23, like that squad would, or that match day 23 would be dominated by Munster players, and yet Connacht have twice gone to Munster's backyard and proven a match for them pretty much.
Yeah, it's testament, fair play to Connacht. A good reaction from obviously what had been a very poor Dragons performance, and they got amongst them, and they made the game an absolute nightmare for Craig Casey and Joey Carberry. You know, you hit the nail on the head there about the breakdown. I mean, effectively they had absolutely zero security on their own ball. So, you know, for Carberry, he wasn't getting any bit of any flow. And then the weather conditions, and I think Munster have got a work to do in terms of their alignment as well. Like their depth is non-existent, and it's easy for teams to get off the line and actually shut them down. So when Joey looks up, he doesn't really have a passing option. So I can understand why their general phase attack struggled. It was mainly down to them not winning collisions and being on the front foot from their forward carries, and even guys like Coombs were quiet from that point of view. In fairness, Connacht defended, and their tackle tech and their aggression was very good. And then the fact that, you know, the ball has been turned over at every third or fourth breakdown for both teams. I mean, Cloete destroyed the Connacht breakdown as well. So it wasn't exclusively that, but it meant there was no real shape to the game. And in fairness, I think Munster did roll up the sleeves and they went back to their forwards and they won the game, which they had to do. But I think disappointingly for me, as I said it earlier, was they don't, like, you know, it's only one example, but it's an example that maybe people remember rather than giving examples they don't, is the Carberry, you know, kick off a right-hand scrum. I mean, to kick across yourself there, you know, with Marmion coming onto your right foot and Carty getting in front of you as well is absolute madness, you know. Like how they didn't play some kind of a play to get the ball to Zebo, to bring up the John Porsche and actually then obviously open up the whole backfield. I mean, that's something that you would expect them to have on their playbook, you know. So, you know, I don't know why, and I don't think it's all on Joey. I mean, you know, Keith Earls is there, Rory Scanlon is there, Haley's an experienced player, Zebo's an experienced player. I mean, but that should be that's standard practice, that every team has an option to run kick there, right? So that's something that worries me a little bit. And there was other examples of not being smart. And then if you look back at their launch plays, right, which have nothing to do with the breakdown, I mean, their timing, their lines of running were very poor. And like there's even one that Joey has to knock it up himself because I think Scanlon overruns him. So like that's stuff they have to fix, you know, and that's not down to Connacht being aggressive or the breakdown. That's stuff that's in their own control, and it's only 4 weeks in. But you would certainly like to see some signs of progression in those areas. And I look at it, it looks like the coaches are all re-signing for another 2 years. So there's longevity there. And, there's going to be consistency and cohesion, etc. But you just like to see a little bit more in the areas that they can control, that Munster are going to have a decent scrum. They're going to have a good line out. You're going to have to exit off both. You'd like to see a little bit more logic or smarts there to take the pressure off someone like Joey, and use other people's skills. Like, I'm using Zebo in this example, but there's lots of good players. Like when they have Farrell and Delande come back in, are they really sure how they want to use them to the best of their ability?
Sticking with yourself for a second, Birch, then, from Connacht's point of view, even in defeat, do you think, putting aside the fact that he was incredibly pissed off naturally about the Cloete try, do you think Andy Friend leaves Thomond Park and when things cool down a little bit, he is fairly happy in the sense that, okay, a week beforehand, they flattered to deceive against the Dragons. They lost a game that you would have down as a banker win. But on the flip side of that, 2 games out of 3, they've played fairly formidable opposition. Munster, one of the 7-8 best teams in Europe, let's say. Bulls, who we think will come into their own, and they've put it up to them. They've beaten the Bulls. They should have beaten Munster. And can you glean from that, or can you take from that something resembling momentum? There were 2 performances at least within the space of 3 weeks that you can build upon there.
Absolutely. He's getting back on that bus. Incredibly proud of his players, and we'll be delighted that he showed that bounce back ability of coming back from a poor Dragons performance and going to Thomond Park and playing. But again, in some ways that'll be annoying him. That'll be frustrating because they blew the game they should have won, or could, and then Munster would have been a freebie, and he's left without the points. And with we've spoken about before, with the URC European Cup qualifications being harder this year, it's going to be hard to get those points back that they lost against the Dragons. That's the killer. But look, at least he's gone back knowing he has a team who have fight, who have skill. He's just got to try and find the key to unlocking that inconsistency that's incredibly frustrating, because they beat Munster, Ulster and Leinster away last year, but they backed them up or before those games were some of their worst performances in years. So that's the $1 million problem that he's going to have to try and find a solution to.
And that's why this weekend against Ulster in the Aviva is absolutely pivotal for them already. It's early days in the season, I know, but they lose that game and this 5-week block has been a really poor return for them. I know they're probably going to be disappointed with the attendance figures there at the Aviva this weekend. They're hoping for a bigger crowd, but whoever is there is going to have to give them a hell of a lot of support. As Birch mentions, that Dragons game at home, that should be an absolute banker. Even away to Cardiff, they came away with nothing from that, and that was a miss. Even losing bonus points are important when this is all going to come to a head at the end of the season. You look at the table, they're already down in 11th, and obviously there's frustrations around the circumstance of last weekend, but it's really important that they finish this block with a bang against Ulster.
Just very briefly before we move on to Ulster, and I know you mentioned it earlier, Murray, that Jack Carty can consider himself unlucky to be omitted from this Ireland squad. He's man of the match in Thomond Park. He completely outplays Joey Carbery. I completely take Bernard's point that Andy Farrell might sense there's a higher ceiling to Carbery. He still might be the incumbent or the heir to the throne, and it's worth rolling the dice and finding out, I guess. Whereas maybe with Carty's age and the fact that he's been playing fairly consistently now for the last few years, we sort of know what he is or what he can do. That being said, what he can do is really good, and at the moment it looks like more than what Carbery is able to do for probably a variety of reasons. But do you think, when you consider how often we've seen Carty play this well, and it's quite regular, it might not be consistent, but it is regular, and the fact that, say, Carbery in a Munster jersey, allowing for the fact obviously that he missed a huge portion of his time there through injury, we still point back to a game against Gloucester 2.5, 3 years ago, probably at this stage, where, remember what he did that day, he can be that good. Whereas Carty has probably produced similar performances to that, almost routinely in the last couple of years. you've said he's unlucky, but like, is he extremely unlucky? I just, it must be tough for him to play that well, that regularly, and just feel as though, I'm not going to get a shot here internationally.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Like, is he playing at that level that regularly? I think the issue has been the inconsistency with him, and he's put his hand up. Like in the Dragons game, which very few people in comparison, I would say, actually watched. He wasn't a standout performer, and I'd say he was disappointed with a lot of elements of his game. And like watching him across the course of the season, without being too harsh, that is the story of his career, really. And he's flagged that himself. He knows that if he can be closer towards that Munster performance more often, then he will obviously be back in that mix. But it is more up and down. There's the drop off after the highs, and is reflective of Connacht as a collective. And obviously, as we've just kind of been alluding to, the out halves and nines are often a reflection of how their team is doing. Like, they're the ones most prominently in everyone's eyes, and most attention is on them. So I don't know, like, I think he's an absolutely wonderful player. I love the skill set he has. I think his kicking game adds something different, and I think it is valuable having that in your squad. And as I've said, I would have had him in that mix very often, but I think Carberry has loads of lovely skills as well, and has played when he's been fit. And obviously coming back from the injury, there's a whole lot of issues there, and even his confidence, I think he looks a little bit indecisive at times, and that'll come. But I think our most recent bank of our extended run of form, he was playing at a consistently good level where it didn't really dip away very often, and that applies to international rugby as well. Like, he has more experience than Carty. Maybe people would argue Carty should have more international experience, and that he has done well given opportunities, but Carberry has done well in international rugby as well, so that counts a lot. We know in Test rugby it's not just about the most recent match or the URC or Pro 14 form. They often bank what they've done in international camps and in the green jersey before as well. So yeah, I definitely feel that it's tough for Jack Carty, but I can kind of understand why he's gone with the 10s he has.
Fair. Bernard, looking at Ulster's victory last weekend, how do you anticipate that this one is going to go at the Aviva? Like, they continue to roll on. They continue to get the job done. I know a couple of listeners from Ulster have been in touch saying, like, we're not speaking about Ulster enough. I think there will come a time when we're speaking about them an awful lot. At the moment, it feels as though, like, they're doing incredibly well, but this isn't going to be their team for sort of bigger games, realistically. Like, it's still sort of injury plagued. They were unchanged at the weekend. But it's an absolute credit to them that they're still going. And they'll be favourites going into this game, I presume. Are they favourites to your mind?
Yeah, they are favourites because they've just got into a habit of wearing teams down and getting the attacking bonuses. I think Connacht are still a little bit trying to find that run of confidence and momentum that obviously that Ulster have. And I think it's brilliant for Ulster to have the injuries they've had, to be missing players, and obviously Dwayne Vermeulen to come back, to come over, to rack up 20 points is pretty impressive. And Ulster have to be favourites for it, but I think maybe Connacht will catch them. I mean, they probably, Ulster have had 3 home games. Their away game was against Zebra. I think Connacht have played harder. Certainly, Munster away is a harder fixture than Zebra away. So I think Connacht need to win. They need to win, and maybe just expose some of the little cracks that we've seen in Ulster's game. But it'll be very tight. Yeah.
Did you see much progression, Murray, in Ulster's performance against the Lions versus their performance against Benetton, in the sense that Dan McFarlane stuck with the same starting team at least, and you'd sort of hope for a little bit of added cohesion then when you're playing week to week with the same combinations and so on?
It kind of feels like the performance has been the same each week, like really good outcome, lots of little positive parts, but definitely an underlying kind of layer of frustration, and I sensed it from them after the game, and McFarlane was pretty honest with it. Lots of good stuff done, but the attacking breakdown was a frustration. They gave away a couple of key turnovers. They were a little bit sloppy inside the opposition 22 when they'd done all the hard work to create chances, not giving a pass, maybe making a poor decision to snipe or to carry close to the ruck when the space was out a little wider, and some straight up drop balls. There was one from Dave McCann down the left. Sam Carter got stripped a couple of times as well. So they definitely haven't got their 9 out of 10 performance yet, I don't think, and they'll feel that that's been coming a little bit. Obviously major frustration and disappointment for Will Addison again, because he looked really sharp at times in that game. When he got on the ball, you can see the creative skills he has and the different dimension he brings to it, but he's got another spell on the sidelines now after the really unfortunate leg break. So yeah, with Ulster, like, you don't want to be, again, you look at the outcome and the perfect points record and you think you have to be happy with that, but I know that internally they don't really feel that way just yet, and they feel there's a lot more to come. So from their point of view, what better occasion than down in the Aviva this weekend?
There's probably a sense with the Snyman injury a couple of weeks ago, Bernard, that Van Gran and Munster will have to change their plans slightly for this season, having lost a player of his calibre and how he would have factored into what they want to do. I kind of get a similar impression with Addison, because he can do so much. Like, he is a sort of a jack of all trades in any backline, really, and just adds a string to Ulster's bow now that will be missing. I know they have loads and loads of talented players in the back three, some really good young players coming through as well, but can you put into context how big a loss it is, probably from, well, we know it's a loss for Ulster, but even just the way Dan McFarlane will be thinking about the season moving forward?
Yeah, it'll be really big because of the way Ulster have tweaked their attack. So it's a different attacking philosophy under Dan Soper than it was under Dwayne Peel. So Dwayne Peel, it seems from looking at teams he coaches, all about power and being direct, whereas Soper's looking to create mismatches on the edges. And a big part of that is obviously playing off midfield rooks and having two playmakers. And Addison is one of the few 15s who genuinely is comfortable stepping up there. So you can have Madigan or Billy Burns on the right hand side, hypothetically, and you can have Addison on the left, and that changes the picture dramatically for defences, having someone who's comfortable being that first receiver, and it often makes teams go a little bit softer, which, you know, gives you opportunities on the edges. And Ulster have created a lot of opportunities on the edges, and you know, they've done well out of it with McElroy and Gilroy. But I think when you put Stockdale and Ballycloone in there, if they can find the same space, it'll just be a different story. And you know, I watched Stade Francais score a great try with McAloo at the weekend, who plays in, they play a 1-3-3-1 shape, and he's the winger. And again, it was a similar type of picture that Ulster have been getting, but he just burnt his opposite man and scored a phenomenal try. And I think you know, while Ulster have loads of depth at wing, you know, realistically Stockdale and Ballycloone are a little bit more dangerous, and I think that's what that was a big driver in terms of why they wanted to get into that philosophy or that shape, and Addison was a part of it for sure. But I don't think they'll go away from it now. I think they'll stay with it, but it mightn't be as effective with him gone.
Yeah, gutted for him on a personal level as well. We wish him well on the recovery and looking forward to seeing him back. Hopefully he has better luck next time he returns. Murray, Ulster and Connacht at the Aviva, or rather Connacht and Ulster. Which way are you leaning with that one?
Oh, Connacht narrowly.
And you're the same, Bert, yeah?
Yeah.
Interesting. Leinster put 50 on the Scarlets. We were asking, could Hugh Hogan do a bit of a job on Leinster, and he would have been expecting, as would the entire Scarlets organisation, really a reaction from the very poor performance a week beforehand against Munster. Sick of yourself, Murray. They actually got that reaction to begin with, is the thing. They actually played pretty well in the first half and took the lead, but Leinster's quality, and actually their forwards especially, really paid dividends. What was it? 7 tries they scored, 6 forward tries and 1 penalty try, which sort of tells its own story, doesn't it?
Yeah, that was a scrum penalty try, so it's definitely the forwards bagging the credit there. We discussed it in the members pod on Monday, like the scoreline in a weird way was almost not reflective. I thought Scarlets did loads of good stuff and had nice moments, but it just shows the extra gears that Leinster can go through when they are required. I thought obviously one of the tries, speaking of the refereeing, I thought one of the tries included a knock-on during the build-up that was missed, which was obviously frustrating for Scarlets at a kind of key point in the game, but Leinster were thoroughly deserving of their victory because they, as I say, went through those gears. The pack was just immense. I thought Ross Maloney was one of the standout guys, and he's one who doesn't make headlines, but he's a really important cog in it. He brought grit and he brought skill level, and he kind of typified everything that pack has, and you think of the guys who weren't even playing that Leinster can use up front, and it's scary. I thought the first outing for the Porter, Kelleher, Furlong front row was really promising, really exciting to see the three of them on the pitch. Porter making jackal turnovers, Furlong still obviously getting up to the pace of it, Kelleher so explosive. And then they rolled on Healy and Sheehan and Alatoa, and you think this is just an unbelievable weapon for them this season, because those three guys made a big impact as well after the aforementioned penalty try around the scrum. So like, there's really nice depth in that front row, a really nice combination if they can keep those guys fit, that if you're looking further down the line is potentially the difference when you meet a La Rochelle or someone who has size like Will Skelton in their squad, because that was the kind of one of the key issues they identified last season. So overall a really pleasing day for them. You have to give the back some credit. Some of the build-up attack, I thought, in the middle of third of the pitch to get the forwards into those positions was really inventive and sharp. There's a bounce to their attack at the moment. There's a zest maybe to it, in terms of you can see Lancaster and Sexton have this revitalised approach to it, and they're studying the way the game is going. There's loads of little fresh ideas. Everything's not exactly working out, but even some of the shapes they're playing and how they're varying things up in attack, they're very tough to defend against, because you just don't know exactly where it's coming from. So having had a couple of stuttering performances as we flagged, and a couple of underperformances, including that Dragons one, this was much more what they would have wanted to show, and I think they're definitely tracking the right direction with that development of their squad, particularly in the front row as well, looking really promising.
Yeah, nice challenge for them now tomorrow night. We record on Thursday, Birch. Friday night they're in Glasgow. I'm sure Leo Cullen and Stuart Lancaster would have come away from that game feeling as though it was maybe not like a complete performance. It's rare that a coach will ever kind of admit that a team has played 100% well, but as Murray outlines there, just a more pleasing, more rounded performance than we've seen in recent weeks. But now you're probably going there to Glasgow, that is, sorry. You would have, I presume, like to have played Johnny Sexton. I think he's ruled out for the time being. It doesn't look to be a particularly serious injury. Just a little bit of a reshuffle needed again. Obviously, James Ryan as well, as following return to play protocols. It might be a bit soon for him this week. So how do you assess that trip to the Warriors based on what we saw from Leinster last weekend? Is the momentum there now where you can kind of expect Leinster to just win every game again, basically, in this competition?
Yeah, look, it was a very impressive performance. I think for Leinster fans who haven't seen Glasgow, Glasgow are a good side, but what's really changed about them is how would you say it? How there's lots of off the ball, there's lots of like bust ups and all ins. They're really playing on the edge. Some of the fans will remember the bit of history there was between Munster and Glasgow about 3 or 4 years ago, where it was really, really on a fine line between, being overstepping the mark. That seems to be what Danny Wilson, and it's not that he's not giving them technical and tactical instruction, but they're really playing on the edge, and that's probably something that Leinster will have to deal with away from home. It's a tight pitch, it's 4G, and that kind of constant in your face type of attitude that Glasgow seem to be bringing, which is great. I mean, it's everyone has their own way of trying to create success, but it's something that probably certainly wasn't the case against Scarlets. I mean, even though Scarlets played better, Leinster were very much on the front foot, and probably the last against the Dragons, they kind of got bogged down a little bit, with speed of ball, and it's probably the next test for them. I think it'll be a harder match than they obviously last week against Scarlets. Just about Scarlets, I think, I feel sorry for Dwayne Peel. I mean, if you follow his progress, he went to Cardiff Blues, with the understanding he was going to have a director of rugby, John Mulvihill, above him. And that's what he wanted. He wants to be a head coach on the pitch. Obviously, John Mulvihill moved on. Di Young wants to be on the pitch, who replaced John Mulvihill. So that left Dwayne with a decision to make. He went to Scarlets to work under Glenn Delaney. Glenn Delaney got moved on. And, they tried to bring in a director of rugby. They don't have one. So Dwayne is now trying to build a team with all the nonsense that you have to do off the field as well. So I feel sorry for him. And they've got Benetton this weekend. They got to play Benetton without the Welsh internationals because Wales play New Zealand next week outside the window. And then when they come out of it, they go to Sharks and Bulls. So, it's not easy when you're struggling for a win or performance, and the calendar, it kind of works against you a little bit. But look at that. Fascinating to see how Leinster deal with that kind of antagonism that they're probably going to face against Glasgow.
Do you anticipate that they'll deal with it well enough to get a win, Murray?
Yeah, I'd predict a Leinster win there with at least 15 all-in brawls, because last time it was real nasty, wasn't it? I know some of the stuff right went over the top last time, but that is the way. You see Munster and Glasgow with that vicious rivalry, but I think Leinster have kind of stepped in and replaced Munster there.
It's the type of thing that a commentator will tell you, "Oh, we don't like to see that," but I do. I love to see it. Not gonna lie. Birch, Leinster win for you, or could Glasgow get a little bit of an upset there? Okay.
Leinster have too many weapons, I think, to lose.
And Munster away to Ospreys this weekend. How do you see that one going, boys? Birch?
I think Munster win. I had high hopes for Ospreys. I know they got a good win last weekend, but yeah, I think Munster win that.
I'm in the same boat there as well, Gav.
Lovely. Okay. Thank you, gents, as always.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you to everybody at home as well. To join the 42 members in the members WhatsApp group to support our independent sports journalism and to get a discount for our new book, Behind the Lines Volume 5, go to members.the42.ie. The book is available on the 42's online shop, www.the42.shop. It'll also be available physically in bookstores as well very soon. Keep your eyes peeled for that. Murray will be back on Monday with Owen, looking back in the weekend's action on Rugby Weekly Extra. That's for members. 3 of us will be back then in this regular slot next Thursday. So until then, mind yourselves, take it easy, and enjoy all the rugby over the weekend.